Now, NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio with Lee Witting. Whether you're listening on TalkZone, by podcast, through the archives of our ad-free shows on our YouTube channel, or connected through the incredible content of our Facebook page. Today's experiencer is Hildegard von Bingen, one of the most incredible visionary geniuses ever to have lived. According to Wikipedia, Hildegard was born in the year 1098 and became known as the Sibyl of the Rhine. Hildegard served as a German Benedictine abbess, but she was active as a mystic visionary as well as a writer, composer, philosopher, and a medical practitioner during the High Middle Ages. She is one of the best-known composers of sacred chant, but is also considered to be the founder of scientific natural history in Germany. Hildegard wrote theological, botanical, and medicinal works, as well as letters, hymns, and antiphons for the clergy. She wrote poems and supervised the miniature illuminated manuscript of her first work, Scivis. There are more surviving chants by Hildegard than by any other composer from the entire Middle Ages, and she is one of the few known composers to have written both the music and the words. One of her works, the Ordo Virtutum, is an early example of liturgical drama and arguably the oldest surviving morality play. She is known for the invention of an unknown language written in unknown letters, which she apparently used for mystical purposes. On the 7th of October, 2012, Pope Benedict XVI named her a Doctor of the Church in recognition of, quote, her holiness of life and the originality of her teaching, unquote. In her Vita, Hildegard states that from a very young age she experienced visions. Hildegard's spiritual awareness was grounded in what she called the reflection of the living light. In a letter she wrote at the age of 77, Hildegard described her experience of this light. Quote, from my early childhood, before my bones, nerves, and veins were fully strengthened, I have always seen this vision in my soul, even to the present time when I am more than 70 years old. In this vision, my soul, as God would have it, rises up high into the vault of heaven and into the changing sky and spreads itself out among different peoples, although they are far away from me in distant lands and places. And because I see them this way in my soul, I observe them in accord with the shifting of clouds and other created things. I do not hear them with my outward ears, nor do I perceive them by the thoughts of my own heart, or by any combination of my five senses, but in my soul alone, while my outward eyes are open. So I have never fallen prey to ecstasy in the visions, but I see them wide awake, day and night, and I am constantly fettered by sickness, and often in the grip of pain so intense that it threatens to kill me, but God has sustained me until now. The light which I see thus is not spatial, but it is far, far brighter than a cloud which carries the sun. I can measure neither height nor length nor breadth of it, and I call it the reflection of the living light. And as the sun, the moon, and the stars appear in water, so writings, sermons, virtues, and certain human actions take form for me and gleam. The clarity and depth of Hildegard's visions are captured in some of the powerful observations she left for us to consider. For example, she wrote, Holy Spirit, the life that gives life, you are the cause of all movement. You are the breath of all creatures. You are the salve that purifies our souls. You are the ointment that heals our wounds. You are the fire that warms our hearts. You are the light that guides our feet. Let all the world praise you. Or this, the soul is a breath of living spirit that with excellent sensitivity permeates the entire body to give it life. Just so the breath of the air makes the earth fruitful. Thus the air is the soul of the earth, moistening it and greening it. Of a dark vision, she wrote, "The dark membrane contained also a dark fire of such horror that I was unable to perceive it properly. The horror buffeted the dark membrane with a massive impact of sounds and storms and sharp stones great and small. Whenever the noise arose, it set in motion the layer of bright fire, winds, and air, thus causing bolts of lightning to presage the sounds of thunder. So for the fiery energy senses the first agitations of the thunder within it." And she wrote, "Glance at the sun, see the moon and the stars, gaze at the beauty of earth's greenings. Now think, what delight God gives to humankind with all these things. All nature is at the disposal of humankind. We are at work for it. For without it, we cannot survive. The earth which sustains humanity must not be injured. It must not be destroyed." She writes, "All living creatures are sparks from the radiation of God's brilliance, emerging from God like the rays of the sun." And says, "Love abounds in all things, excels from the depths to beyond the stars, is lovingly disposed to all things. Love has given the King on high the kiss of peace." And she wrote, "Holy wisdom, soaring power, encompass us with wings unfurled and carry us encircling all, above, below, and through the world." Or, like billowing clouds, like the incessant gurgle of the brook, the longing of the spirit can never be stilled. And here's a short quote: "The truly holy person welcomes all that is earthly." She wrote, "Underneath all the texts, all the sacred psalms and canticles, these watery varieties of sounds and silences, terrifying, mysterious, whirling, and sometimes gestating and gentle, but must somehow be felt in the pulse, the ebb and flow of the music that sings in me. My new song must float like a feather on the breath of God." She writes, "Everything that is in the heavens, on earth, and under the earth is penetrated with connectedness, penetrated with relatedness." And she said, "Every creature is a glittering, glistening mirror of divinity." Also, our souls should be like a transparent crystal through which God can be perceived. And finally, as a quote, "Just as birds are lifted up into the air by their feathers and can remain wherever they wish, the soul in the body is elevated by thought and spreads its wings everywhere." To tell you more about the visions of Hildegard, I'd like to move to a portion of a paper my wife Charlene wrote about her. And she begins with a quote from the Whirlwinds to Hildegard. "Who are you, and what are you doing? And what are these battles you are fighting?" The Whirlwind. In the 1141st year of the incarnation of the Son of God, when Hildegard of Bingen was almost 43 years old, an energy like the warm rays of the sun illumined her soul. The light flooded her brain, her intellect, and her emotions. Without time, she comprehended the meaning within all of the Scriptures. It was not that she understood the sense of every word or the grammar of every sentence, but she knew who she was in eternity, and she knew what she had been doing in the visible and what it meant to the invisible. In the world, she was magistra of the convent attached to the monastery of Disemboddenberg since the death of her mentor Jutta in 1136. She followed the Benedictine rule and had been educated in the liberal arts. As she herself writes, she had experienced in herself private visions from the age of 5. She also had been troubled with ill health, which she finally saw when in extreme suffering as a forceful prodding from God to reveal what had been revealed to her. This she did in her first work, A Know the Ways of the Lord, in which separate visions were arranged like chapters and organized into 3 books, the Creator and creation, the Redeemer and redemption, and the history of salvation symbolized by a building. The work took 10 years to complete with the help of a secretary and was approved before its completion in 1147 by the Pope, Pope Eugenius III. In each chapter, the vision is described with detail so vivid it was possible to paint miniatures that accompany the text. The mandala-like art doesn't quite convey the special effect movie quality that were projected or played upon some interior faculty of Hildegard's consciousness. In her introductory declaration, Hildegard writes that she was awake and not in an altered state when she received the visions. She sees and hears with inner senses, seeing with a pure mind out in the open in public places. From the text, it is not clear if the voice which she quotes speaks in real time or if she's had a flash of comprehension that then pours out in words when she records her experience. The voice in her visions tells her she has been chosen and afflicted by the living light to be, quote, placed among great wonders beyond the measure of the ancient people who saw me in many secrets. She is capable because she feels herself incapable with inner distresses and bodily weaknesses. But first and most importantly, she has ascended to humility and has willed the good. Humility is the key virtue. All others follow from it. The human condition appears totally hopeless. Instead of the companion of angels, the human being, bearer of the living breath of God, turns its eyes of clay away from the saving dawn of the east to the home of the devil in the north. The senses are filled with the sight of open wounds and the stench of decay. The soul, the life, is a stricken and maimed slave afflicted on all sides by a world filled with vicious and repulsive predators. But we know we are created by God. We remember our mother Zion, where we should have lived. We hear the music of the home of heaven. We remember the glory. The memories only intensify the pain of exile, but even as the soul can know it is lost, it can will to escape. The soul enlivens the body. It flows through every cell. The senses communicate the soul to the body. The fire or power of the soul is manifest in the intellect and the will. The intellect is to the soul as the heart is to the body, and the will is like the members, that which moves and does the work. The will and the intellect reside in an inner and protected tabernacle, not made of clay like the body, but of steel. The will then acts to escape the torments of sin and the world and hides the soul away in a cave. This action, this good intent, is aided by grace. The sensing of the lost mother strengthens the resolve to resume the trip away from the north to the east. Life on earth is a pilgrimage along a narrow path that is almost impassable. Finally, a summit is reached, and in a state of exhaustion, the soul faces itself. Everything is questioned, and everything is rejected. A final escape from self seems the only course, but the senses are filled with sorrow. The nature of life itself is static, incapable of productivity. All hope in the good is lost. Very existence is questioned. But then, by grace, the soul remembers it is of and from God, and the will is renewed in the inner tabernacle, which then acts to control the outer one of the body. This is possible by looking at the nature of God and the sacrifice of the Son of God. Virtues bloom from the cleansed earth of the soul, which heighten the senses and spiritual joy. And finally, the first disobedience is overcome in the body, and the virtue of humility in the soul wards off every vice. Another facility of the soul is reason. Reason has sound and brings understanding through the spoken word. This is also why the Son of God is called the Word, because through him we know and have understanding of God. Wounds, gangrene, stench, bestiality, filth upon filth fills the pages. Is this fastidiousness of someone highborn, which Hildegard was? Is it the reality of living without antibiotics, where open, slow-healing wounds are common? Is it a revulsion for the detritus of nature in a society that is still living closely to its work animals? Or is this the true picture of the unconverted soul? This is not uncommon mystical language. There is the other side, thorns that bloom into fragrant roses, the green, moist fertility of Eden, the pure greenness of the Virgin. There's also the music of heaven and the glorious warm light of the eternal. There's also the question of illness and how constant pain and weakness on one hand and then convalescence on the other can sharpen the awareness of the body and the senses. And she concludes by saying Oliver Sacks writes about this condition in A Leg to Stand On, a recollection of his own injury and healing. His descriptions of scotoma, which they think Hildegard suffered from, and then Thankful Joy have the same visceral quality of Hildegard's experience. And this is a quote from Oliver Sacks. What was it then that came suddenly back, embodied in music, glorious music? It was the triumphal return of the quintessential living I, lost for 2 weeks in the abyss, not the ghostly, cogitating, solipsistic I of Descartes, not this impotence, this mentalistic fiction. What came so palpably, so gloriously, was a full-bodied, vital feeling and action originating from an aboriginal, commanding, willing I. What appeared in this moment transcended the physical, but instantly organized and reorganized it into a seamlessly perfect whole. This new hyperphysical principle was grace. Grace entered, as grace enters, at the very center of things, at its hidden, innermost, inaccessible center, and instantly coordinated, subordinated all phenomena to itself. And that's where Charlene's paper ended. Now, coincidentally, I did a paper on Hildegard von Bingen myself, and it was titled Relating Hildegard's Language of Knowing to Our Own. And I'm going to quote some of that to you to round out the show. So my paper begins. One of the problems encountered with many discussions of mystical experience is the experiencer's frequent disclaimer that words cannot express the ineffable event, even though the visionary may go on to write books worth of words about it. And I think you all know about that. Happily, that is not the case with Hildegard von Bingen, whose peculiar temperament gave her a propensity for visions from earliest childhood. She could see things that were invisible to those around her. She foretold the future, and her visual field was filled at all times with a strange luminosity that she later came to call the reflection of the living light. Barbara Newman, in her introduction to Know the Ways of the Lord, Hildegard's book, reports that Charles Singer and more recently Oliver Sacks have concluded that the abbess suffered from scintillating scotoma, a form of migraine. Yet if we are to consider Hildegard's writings as a source of spiritual truth, we need to explore her visions not as side effects of disease, but as a vision of a higher reality in both her terms and ours. Fortunately, our knowledge of physics has more than kept pace with our knowledge of psychology, and I think Hildegard's observations deserve vetting in those terms, as well as in the more familiar vocabulary of sickness and hallucination. By examining Hildegard's writings describing angels as a mechanism of contact between the physical and the spiritual worlds, I hope to take the discussion, however briefly, in this different direction. I write here about Hildegard's gift. We inhabit a world our senses define as three-dimensional, and even though theoretical physics posits a 10-dimensional reality, now sometimes 11 dimensions, our age is wedded to its rational perceptions. Now contrast this fact with Hildegard's description of her way of seeing. The light I see thus is not spatial, she writes, but it is far, far brighter than a cloud that carries the sun. I can measure neither height nor length nor breadth of it, and I call it the reflection of the living light. Or here's her description of her profound illumination when she was 42. Heaven was opened, and a fiery light of exceeding brilliance came and permeated my whole brain and inflamed my whole heart, my whole breast, not like a burning, but like a warming flame. And immediately I knew the meaning of the exposition of the Scriptures, namely the Psalter, the Gospel, and the other Catholic volumes of both the Old and New Testaments, though I did not have the interpretation of the words of their texts, or the division of the syllables, or the knowledge of cases and tenses. Now, this description closely approximates Acts' description of the flames of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit came down on the heads of the apostles. If we are to believe in the possibility of such an event, then we should consider Hildegard's description as not merely symbolic, but real in every sense of that word. In his commentary on Hildegard's illuminations, Matthew Fox writes, "In my opinion, this synchronicity between a 12th century mystic and a 20th century physicist is one of the obvious examples of how Hildegard did not know all that she was saying. In other words, her writing and visioning were truer than her conscious awareness could articulate." Of course, scientists other than psychologists have considered rational scientific mechanisms to explain Hildegard's visions, such as Fox has mentioned that scientists from the University of Munich had recently been doing studies of Hildegard's cell and have found there as high an electromagnetic energy source as exists anywhere in Europe. Hildegard must have spent many sleepless nights in this cell, Matthew Fox says. That such a setting might help facilitate visions in no way conflicts with the authenticity of the illuminations Hildegard describes. And Hildegard spoke about angels. Vision 6 of Book 1, titled The Choirs of Angels, provide Hildegard's description of two armies of faithful angels and further describes their ranks by form and emanation. She writes in part, "Then I saw in the secret places in the heights of heaven 2 armies of heavenly spirits who shone with great brightness. Those in one of the armies had on their breasts wings which with forms like human forms in front of them, on which human features showed as if in clear water. Those in the second army also had wings on their breasts which displayed forms like human forms, in which the image of the Son of Man shone as if in a mirror, and I could see no other form either in these or in the 2 others." In her explication, Hildegard makes clear that angels are created creatures like humankind, and indicates that God destined some created creatures to inhabit celestial regions in the height of secret places that the bodily eye cannot penetrate, but the inner sight can see. So with her inner sight, Hildegard describes what might be called projections, complete with wings for vanishing points, from another dimension into our own. Their duties, links, likenesses, whatever, are projections too, quote, with forms like human forms in front of them, on which human features showed as if in clear water. Interesting description. Such a description of projections from another dimension have much in common with superstring theory, in which physicist-mathematician Michio Kaku describes our reality as projections of strings from other dimensions. We see the ends of strings with our ordinary vision, while the bulk of reality stretches out of our perception through the rest of the 10-dimensional universe. While it's beyond the scope, I write, of this paper to delve at length into superstring theory, an analogy from high school science class makes the point clear enough to continue our dialogue with Hildegard. School teachers tell their students the story of the Flatlanders, imaginary 2-dimensional creatures that inhabit a sheet of paper sitting before you on the desk. Being 2-dimensional, all the Flatlanders can perceive is length and breadth on the flat plane of the paper. Bring a pencil point down to their flat world, and it will seem to them as if a miracle has occurred. A point has appeared out of nowhere, for all they can see is the tip of the pencil. They are blind to the bulk of the pencil as it rises away from the paper into a dimension they cannot envision. Only a theoretical mathematician or a Flatlander, Hildegard, could describe the possibility of a number 2 yellow shaft rising invisibly from a visible point into a secret place of God's creation. Should the physics of Hildegardian visions matter in any way to the spiritual insight we gain from her? Should or shouldn't are no longer relevant questions to our 3-dimensional rational world. The fact is that Hildegard's relevance won't survive beyond the role of feminist hero if it's only to be measured in poetical terms. And to her credit, she would not have wanted her books to be read as poetic symbolism anyway. Continuing in her vision of the choirs of angels, Hildegard wrote, But these armies were also arrayed like a crown around two others. Those in the first of these other armies seemed to be full of eyes and wings, and in each eye appeared a mirror, and in each mirror a human form. And they raised their wings to a celestial height. And those in the second burned like fire, and had many wings, in which they showed, as if in a mirror, all the church ranks arrayed in order. And I saw no other shape either in these or in the others. And all these armies were singing with marvelous voices all kinds of music about the wonders that God works in blessed souls, and by this God was magnificently glorified. Hildegard sees an integral connection here between the spiritual world and our own, such that spiritual eyes, knowledge, reflect on and through human action in ways that reflect on and imply the spiritual battle she mentions elsewhere. There is no rest implied, only energy, but sustaining and uniting, like the church below, the heavenly choir expresses a sustained energy in praise of the good and of God. In commenting on the imagery of light and mirroring, Rupert Sheldrake writes, Hildegard goes further than saying that the angels are reflections or mirrors. Light streams out through them, and the spheres of light depend on them. They are now intermediaries as well as mirrors, in a sense that they are two-way mirrors. They reflect back to God. God is seeing the God self in the mirror of the angels. At the same time, they are intermediaries, transmitting the light of God into the realms of life. The angels' tongues are pure praise. Fire is also praise. The flickering flames are praise. Voice is praise. Hearing is praise. All these images of praise are images of movement. Fire moves, wind moves, tongues move, breath moves, hearing moves. In this praise there is a reverse movement toward God, perhaps a mirroring. Energy moves out from God through the angels, and this movement back toward God in the form of praise is vibratory, dynamic, and meaningful. I would like to reiterate in my presentation, this very quick presentation on Hildegard von Bingen, the power that she has displayed down through the ages, not only in terms of her mystical visions for other mystics to inspire them and to help them to communicate, but also to enlighten physicists, scientists looking at what she's saying as a physical reality, albeit one that reaches into different dimensions. This is the importance of the work that you and everyone listening who has possibly had a mystical experience, an NDE or something like that, can bring to the world, if only you're willing to speak about it. Now, to be fair, Hildegard, it took her years. It wasn't until she was 42 that she heard clearly from the voice of God to write it down and spread the word. And so that's the message that I hope is brought to you today. So I've devoted the show to Hildegard's story for that reason. Namely, if a woman in the subservient role of nun during the benighted Middle Ages could overcome self-doubt to tell the world of her mystical insights, then any of us, men and women both, should be able to do the same. And look at the changes she wrought by sharing the light of her revelations. Her writings, her art and music are still being considered today by philosophers, theologians, and scientists as well, and she continues to inspire us to be brave in using our gifts. Well, thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear this show again or any of our more than 500 archived ad-free NDE interviews, go to TalkZone's NDE Radio site and hit the Past Shows button, or go to our YouTube channel, NDE Radio with Lee Witting, where you can subscribe to and comment on the complete NDE Radio library. Be sure to check out our NDE Radio Facebook page, searching NDE Radio with Lee Witting on your Facebook app. And listen next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern at TalkZone, for more NDE Radio. I'm your host, Lee Witting, saying once again, thanks for listening.